about ready to get started. Thank you so much everyone for coming. Welcome to our graduate school application process panel with our lovely graduate students here who are going to introduce themselves in just a moment. I am Alex Pierce, pronouns she, her, hers, from the Center for Career Development. I am a graduate assistant working with students who are transitioning from UConn out into their careers and with recent alumni. So basically the way the format is going to work today is we're going to give some quick introductions, then I have some prepared questions here that I'm going to be asking the panelists to discuss about their grad school application process, and then I will also welcome questions from you, and at the very end give you time to come up and ask individual questions if you would like to. Get started, if you mind introducing yourself.
Sure. I'm Kelly, she, her, hers pronouns, and I study cognitive and neuroscientific approaches to literature in the Department of English. So I'm a second year MA PhD. I did come directly out of undergrad as well. I did English and cognitive science in undergrad at Truman State University, which is a tiny liberal arts school in Missouri, and came directly to UConn after.
Hi, my name's Jillian. I use she, her, her pronouns. I'm a fourth-ish year PhD student in learning leadership and education policy in the NEAG School of Education. And I study more effective ways of teaching and learning in college classrooms. So my goal is to become a faculty member in a school of education. I went to Ithaca College in New York and got my bachelor's in communications. I applied for grad schools then, didn't get into the program I wanted to, took a gap year, applied again, and I did my master's here at UConn in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program. And then I worked for a few years and then went back for my PhD. So done 3 rounds of applications to different programs.
I'm Katie. I am between my second and third year PhD over in the communication department. I did my undergrad at a state school in New York for communication, and then I thought that I wanted to go into higher education, so I did my master's at Northeastern in college student development and counseling, and I worked in higher education, thinking of your residence hall directors, your academic advisors, career counselors, any of that kind of stuff that's along the lines of higher education. So that's what I did for 6 years. I did attempt to apply to PhD programs the year I was graduating from my master's program, didn't get into the programs I wanted, so thus I worked for 5 or 6 years in higher education, and then I applied to a couple more schools, and I decided to come to UConn for my PhD in 2017. So that's kind of how I got here.
Cool. I'm Hannah. It is my first year doing my Master's of Social Work at the UConn School of Social Work, where I am concentrating in social work policy practice. So I want to, my goals are to bring more social work into higher education institutions. I graduated in May from UConn with my Bachelor of Arts in Human Development and Family Studies, and currently, while I study, I am doing a graduate assistantship at the UConn Center for Career Development and Programming, and I do my, it's a practice degree, so I do my field work at Naugatuck Valley Community College with their Title IX interpersonal violence, sexual assault prevention program.
Awesome. Thank you and welcome. So I just want to get us started with a little discussion about what led you to decide to apply to grad school. What were some of the factors that worked into your thinking to pursue either a master's or a PhD, and what were the criteria you used in deciding what programs were a good fit for you?
I can start. So I wanted to be a high school teacher when I was an undergrad, and that was my plan for 3 of 4 years. People from my undergrad don't typically go to grad school. It's not common at all. But I started to realize that the kind of research that I wanted to do could only be done here with a PhD as a professor, and that unfortunately doing something else would mean giving up that research, and I didn't want to do that. So in looking at what schools or what programs fit, for me it was all about who I would be able to work with, what the university could give me, because I study something that's like very atypical and very interdisciplinary. I was really committed to finding a program that would allow me to do English coursework and also like put people in an MRI. And that's harder to find than you would anticipate. So that was kind of what led me to the programs that I applied to.
I think I realized the jobs I want to do required a master's degree, and as far as what programs I was looking into, I wanted to stay in the Northeast, so I was more location bound. I think that's very fine to not have to do a national search. I wanted to be close to my partner, and so I also was looking for a program that would pay you to go, that I wouldn't have to take out a ton of loans. And so those were kind of the important things to me that I was looking for. Since I didn't get that and I took a gap year, I also highly recommend a gap year. I know several people I worked with that had master's degree and were in totally different not related fields to what they were doing. They realized after they got out that they didn't want to do that. And so to spend all that money or time and then realize after you don't want to do it, I think a gap year can kind of help affirm that that's what you really want to do. So I will admit that I did not enjoy my gap year. I worked retail for a year as I was applying to schools, and did a lot of volunteer work in the area I wanted to do, but also just kind of affirmed that that's what I wanted to do. And then I was that much more refreshed when I started my master's program. I felt like going straight through, I would have been a little burnt out. So it was nice to have a year off of homework.
Yeah, I went straight through from my bachelor to my master's, and I was kind of excited to go wherever because, you know, my parents and financial aid and everything helped as far as like my undergrad degree, but then my parents didn't think that a master's degree was that crucial, so they said, you know, if that's something you want to do, you need to fund it in a way that you're going to fund it. And so I went all out. I applied to places all over the country, and I decided to go to Northeastern because I was really excited to live in Boston. And you're kind of limited in how much research you can do as far as physically going to these institutions, especially if you're applying right out of your bachelor's because you're a senior, you're finishing, all that kind of stuff. So that's when a gap year could potentially be, you know, a good idea. So you have time to go visit these schools. I only went to Northeastern once before actually getting in and going there. And, you know, I'm not going to say anything bad about the program, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I definitely recommend researching institutions and, you know, getting into institutions that can help supplement the cost, because I decided to go to a 2-year out-of-state private master's program for which I'm not doing the same work for anymore. So it's a lot of student loan debt because I was kind of very eager to live in a new city and not do as much research as I should have done. And when it came to applying to PhD programs, I too was kind of limited to kind of the Northeast, staying with my partner. I did this time, because I already have student debt, wanted the kind of institution that was going to help me supplement that cost, whether it was with teaching or as a GA or whatever it may be, to kind of alleviate some of that financial burden.
When I was on my search, my top priority was what school do I have to pay for and what school do I not have to pay for. So I started my search for social work programs, trying to find programs that had schools that had graduate assistantships. If you don't know what that is, you work 10, 15, or 20 hours a week, and you don't have to pay for tuition, and then the school also pays you a stipend. So in theory, you are getting paid to go to school, which makes my life a little bit easier. And so I was also looking locally, but so I could like maybe live at home, but the stipend, now I can live on my own. But the biggest thing for my program, and I think a couple of the other programs can probably apply, is finding the schools with the concentrations that you're interested in. Not many social work programs have policy. They might have like administration as their concentration, but UConn has policy, and that's why I chose to go there, because it made the most sense to me. Yeah.
Can you just repeat what you called that? Was it like, you said like graduate?
Graduate assistantship.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They'll call it like a GA.
Yeah.
And just be aware, because I technically had a GA-ship at my master's, but I still paid all of the costs that are associated with going to Northeastern. I just got paid by the university that I worked at, that I did the GA-ship at, and it was a very small amount of money. So just be aware that you understand the full scope of what's being offered, if anything's being offered.
Not all come with tuition waivers.
Right.
Similarly, not to add too much detail, but there are like fellowships and assistantships. They're taxed differently. Basically, it's just like a different way that the university would fund you. So often fellowships, you don't have to work. They're like just basically a scholarship. And so making it really clear when you're like asking about programs or looking at it, like what kind of funding, what is my like expectation of work, and then if you get into those programs, talking to someone right away about like how do you take taxes out, what is the bottom line that I'm like actually gonna get money wise, that kind of stuff. All of that gross adulty stuff does get kind of important.
Right, and it gets important too as far as assistantships. Like here at UConn, if your school is unionized, we have health insurance and different benefits.
Yeah.
And so if you're over 26 and you're not on your parents, that is something to consider as well.
Yeah, so we kind of already segued a little bit into talking about financial considerations, or more than a little bit, I would say. So there are definitely financial considerations in where you choose to go to school, but also I would think in your application processes and how many schools you chose to apply to. So if you could talk a little bit about how your personal finances worked into your grad school application process, that would be great.
I'll start, just so we're not constantly
Yeah,
forcing
yeah.
you to go first. I just kind of made a list, like the way I started organizing it, the most recent time I applied was just by starting a list of what programs I was interested in, where it was located, what the program was, kind of like the details that we talked about, like do they have the focus I'm interested in and things like that. And then putting in a list, like a note of like, this one costs $75 to apply, this one costs $50 to apply, whatever it might be. And then also looking at what tests do they require. So do they require a GRE, a GMAT, a LSAT, or I don't know any of the other tests, but you know, for your various fields there might be tests that are required outside of just like a GRE to get in. So those tests also cost, you know, can be a significant amount of money. So making sure that you're working in enough, you know, financial leeway for yourself to take that test, prepare, you know, buy yourself the materials for studying or taking a study class, something like that. So
I think going off of that, the way I organized my search and application process is I had an Excel spreadsheet, and it was my graduate school application tracker. I wrote some of the things because there are so many things in there. I put the name of the school, the location, the price, how long the program was, because some programs are 2, 3, 4, 5, a million years. My login information for each application portal, because you have to use different emails and usernames and passwords. So I put that in there. I put in all the deadlines, what exams I would have to take, entrance exams, fees for application materials needed. Some schools ask for essays, some ask for like a general personal statement. Some have questions you have to take or have to answer. Numbers of letters of rec needed. Who I was asking for those schools. I mean, the list goes on, but having it all in one Excel spreadsheet made my life so much easier because I could look and see, okay, this is the next deadline. I need to, like, this is my next step for this school. It was all in one place. So I recommend doing that, definitely.
I think I also included the information in there, at least common in higher ed fields, is also a lot of programs require an interview or some kind of visit.
Yeah.
So like when those dates were, so they weren't the same. Like, so you don't have conflicting dates or the travel costs associated with that if you have to attend an interview. Not all fields do, but.
Similarly, for humanities, I was always told that you should not pay a penny for your education because there are very few jobs and it doesn't always pay you back quickly. So I knew that I was only applying to programs that would pay me to go to school, but that means typically putting in more money for applications because those schools are much more selective than those that don't pay for you to go. So for me as a PhD, the professor is everything. I got into schools ranked much better than UConn and didn't go because the professor that I work with here was the best person in my field. But for applications, it was literally thousands of dollars that I spent on applications. And I was a little like I applied to a lot of schools. I did not probably need to apply to all of them, but it can add up really quickly when you're buying like GRE test books and the GRE and the subject GRE and application fees and like the stupid fee to get your transcript sent that you have to do like 13 times, and it adds up very quickly. So it is something to think about, just like looking for financial aid on campus. It does exist, and like fee waivers, if you're eligible for them, apply for them early. I did not know that I was eligible for them as a first generation college student, and so by the time that I realized that, a lot of the fee waivers had closed. So like keeping track of that stuff, all of that information will be online when you go to like look at the school.
That's really helpful. So we talked about a lot of the components and how you guys have approached did approach organizing them when you were applying. I would like to talk a little bit about what component you started with first, and maybe when you started the application process in relation to when the deadlines were.
My first step was seeing what tests they needed, because that's the first thing that you need to take action on, because you need to set up time. Like, you need to set your test date so that like you can get your results and then decide if you want to take it again, and then have everything in order before that first deadline for the actual school application. So the first thing I wanted to make sure in my search is, okay, what do I need to take the GRE for this school, and how much time do I have for that? I don't remember when I first started looking, but I feel like a year and a half like a year and a half before you want to start is probably best. I don't know if it was different for
Because I think
y'all.
some of my earliest applications were due like November or December of my senior year, if you're applying straight through.
Mm-hmm.
So that does involve if it requires a test starting your junior year, essentially. But that's also why gap year is really nice if you do need to pace that. It is very hard to study for the GRE while still in school.
I'll be completely transparent. I never took the GRE. The schools that I found, the schools that I liked, and the schools that I could afford and had the assistantship didn't need GRE.
More and more not requiring it. I took it, and then the school I ended up at didn't require it. So
Yeah.
I took it, and they did require it, and they did require a good score.
Yeah.
So like most of the programs that I was looking at required like 90th percentile or above in verbal. I also do English, so like you better have a good verbal score. But I took it the summer of my like going into senior year. So I finished exams in May. I studied for a long time between May and the first week of June, and I took it in the first week of June. If you don't know what the GRE is, it's basically the ACT, or out here on the coast, you all take the SAT. Yeah, we don't take that in the Midwest. But it's basically that for grad school. The nice thing is the ACT and SAT, you have to wait for your scores. In the GRE, your scores pop up on the screen when you take the test. So you know that day exactly where you fell. You can take it again within, I think, like 14 days. So you can like know exactly where you were and study for it. It sounds really great to take it again. It's $200 every time you register for it. Be aware.
I think the difference with timing, if you're looking at a PhD or maybe an integrated program, it's all about the professor and the relationship. So really you're doing that reaching out first.
Yeah, that was my first step, I think. So I started in fall of 2017. My earliest application deadline was December of 2016. And I started reaching out to like heads of departments at institutions I was looking at, probably like late summer, so not super early. It was kind of I didn't intend to apply to grad school again. It just kind of came through a discussion I had with one of my mentors from my undergrad, so I decided to do it. But yeah, I would say with, at least for my area in communication, a big part of it was reaching out to the faculty that I would anticipate working with if I wanted to go there, talking to them about what it's like in the program. This is what I've done. They also can probably connect you to some of their graduate student advisees to get kind of a graduate student perspective about that institution. So that was some of the things that I did kind of before officially applying. It was very helpful.
When we talk about reaching out, in case that like is a little bit unclear what that means, it varies a bit between disciplines. So like if you're in science, you're probably going to Google someone you want to work with, and their lab page will typically say like accepting people or not accepting people right now. But you should still hopefully reach out to them. In the humanities, I think it's common practice, but you typically email a professor you're interested in working with, and it's a little bit like speed dating. So you're like, this is what I've done in undergrad, this is what I want to study. I saw that you study this thing, this is why I think we would work well together. Are you taking graduate students? It's a really prudent step to do that early in the process, because some people are like going on sabbatical, have 10 grad students, like some people just won't be taking them, which is fine, but knowing that early saves you the money of the application fee, the time that you spent tailoring that application. So reaching out to a professor and just saying, hey, I'm interested in applying to work with you in grad school. Are you taking grad students? Would you be interested in working with me? Is a really good way to like make sure that your list has only people that would actually be interested in working with you.
Because that faculty member has most of the say of whether you get in or not, when it's at the PhD level at least.
Yeah,
They're the one on the committee that says, I want this person. As long as your scores are admissible, they're the one that's going to admit or deny you, pretty much.
Yeah, that's a lot of what goes into applications for at least in communication at UConn. That goes into a lot of why and how they choose master's and PhD students. It's not just like, if someone got in and someone didn't, it's not necessarily that student is better than that student. It's just that, let's say this person was focused on mass media and communication, and this person's focused on, interpersonal communication, and the interpersonal communication person's going on sabbatical for a year. They're not likely to take anyone focused on that kind of thing. So it is good, like was said already, to reach out in advance to let people know the areas that you're interested in. That way you're not spending the money and because it does feel kind of heartbreaking to get rejected, and it isn't necessarily a reflection of like your ability or your capabilities in grad school. It's just like it's not a good fit. It's not mutually a good fit at that time.
So a few of you have mentioned already some of the factors that went into your decisions about what schools to apply to. Could you talk a little bit about how many you applied to, how you arrived at that number, and how you narrowed down your list to get to the number that you ultimately chose to apply to?
I can start. I applied to 13. I applied to the 13 programs in the world that have people that do what I do, so that was pretty easy. I didn't have to narrow things down much. But out of 13 schools that I applied to, I got into 3, and that was pretty high. I know most people in my discipline apply multiple rounds, so it's just something to know that like in undergrad, I applied to 5 schools. I got into 5 schools. If you do get a rejection, like was said, it's not necessarily a reflection of your ability. Rather, there's all kinds of things about fit and the department and funding. It doesn't make sense at all. Like I got into Ivy League schools and didn't get into schools that are so poorly ranked. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's very different than undergrad, where it's like, what is your ACT score? What is your GPA? Can you succeed here? There's a lot of different factors.
I applied 10 years ago, so I really don't remember. I think I applied to 3 or 4 when I was a senior in college, and I got into 1. And then realized I was going to take out so many loans to live in Boston. And so then I applied to UConn, just one school, the only one I wanted to go to the second round. I applied after my gap year. So that does speak to, it does relate so much to the assistantship that's available, because I applied to UConn twice and nothing changed with my scores or anything in my application material, but I got in the second time. And then I only applied to 1 PhD program because I was already working with the faculty member that was my advisor.
For my master's, I think I applied to 6 or 7 schools. Just like I said, I was very excited. I applied to all the way in Colorado, Boston, all over the place. I think I got into 3 or 4. For the first time I applied to my PhD, I applied to 2 programs only. They both only accepted 1 PhD student, and that was obviously not me, which is fine. And that again is a reflection of like that's where their funding was at. They were able to accept one student out of however many applied. And then when I applied this round, when I decided to come to UConn, I think I applied to 4 schools and got into 3. And I obviously came to UConn because they had the kind of best package for me. It was faculty I wanted to work with. The environment was great when I visited. The tuition waiver was a huge benefit, and the location was good. So
Yeah, I applied to 2 schools because the only way I was going to go to grad school was if I could financially do it. So I was kind of bound to Connecticut, and I liked UConn and Southern, and I got into both of them. But at the end of the day, UConn was just it was better ranking, it had the concentration that I was most interested in. It had like the better faculty. It was just a better fit for me. Southern would be closer, closer to where I could have lived, but because UConn had more assistantships available, I was able to commit to UConn and pay for things on my own, which was huge.
You each actually sort of just started to touch upon this, but what were some of the factors that maybe you haven't mentioned yet that led you to choose UConn over other schools? I think we kind of touched on it, so don't feel like you have to repeat yourself, but if there's anything else you want to share about why UConn was the right fit for you, that's great.
For me, the other 2 schools that I got into, one of them was ranked as like a better known school for communication than UConn, but again, it goes by fit. They also have a reputation for being a little bit pretentious, and that's not the environment that I want to be in. It's people who have come out of it have called it a little bit like competitive, and when I came and visited UConn, it was kind of the complete opposite. It's more collaborative as far as grad students go. It's less of like, oh, you got a publication, I need a publication, like, let's fight each other for it. It's more of like a communal thing. And then the third school, they just weren't as well organized, and like they had a hard time keeping my application materials together. They weren't as responsive over email when I had questions about like the next steps of the process. So again, like we've said before, like reaching out to the folks that you're going to be like potentially working with and helping like get to know them before you go through the process is really crucial, because that's really what made and break my decision for choosing UConn.
So I mentioned that UConn was the only one I applied to for my PhD program. I will say, if you're not sure, if you're on the fence, sometimes you can find a company or a corporation that has some kind of education credits. So like I worked at UConn in student affairs for 4 years, and so I started taking some classes non-degree because they had a tuition waiver. So sometimes you can find a company or working at an institution that allows you to take some classes. So I started my PhD program the first 2 years just taking some classes, some night classes that fit into my work schedule before I went full time. So sometimes that is also a nice transition if you can find that way, and it's also shortening the time now that I'm full time.
It's both fortunate and unfortunate that mine is literally just the professor that you're going to work with and the possibility for interdisciplinary work. It means that like assistantships, you might turn down more money to work with someone, but it is part of like doing the work that I want to do, to have someone who's really on the cutting edge. So if that's something you're really interested in, being sure that your advisor is like publishing right now and not just someone who like published 10 years ago and is churning out like one publication every 10 years. That was something that I wanted to be sure that my advisor was really, really active in the field and could help me network. So.
And even just getting along with the person is really important. They make or
That
break
part is
your
nice.
studies.
Especially like if you do an integrated program, I am his and he is mine for 7 years. So if we didn't get along, that would be unfortunate.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the interviewing process for graduate school?
I
didn't have to interview.
I did a 2-day interview here for my master's and a day-long interview for the other school that I got into. So it ranges. I don't know if I have that much to say about it. It's just like a job interview, but it lasts way too long. So it's kind of a time to also feel like if you fit into the school, the culture, because you get to meet other peers, other people in the program. I had different interviews with faculty in the program, advisors in the program. They had some sessions that were more just informational.
Yeah, that was similar to my experience for my master's. I did a phone interview with a school that was out of state. I went to Boston on 2 separate occasions to Northeastern to do sort of the interview full day process for getting into the program. And then once I found out I got into the program, they also host what's called an assistantship days, which is like an interview. It's kind of like a speed dating setup where they have a bunch of schools from like the Massachusetts area around Boston come, and they just set you up with like 15-minute interviews to help find you an assistantship, because in that program you don't necessarily work at the institution that you're going to school at. So I didn't work at Northeastern. I worked 45 minutes outside of Boston. So that was kind of the process for that. When I applied to PhD programs, you can do like campus visits. Like they usually have like open house days, or sometimes if you already know that you're accepted, they'll do like accepted student days. I came to an accepted student day for UConn, and that's a bulk of where I learned kind of like what the campus was like, what the different faculty gave different presentations on the types of things that you would be able to do here. So what the teaching opportunities are, what the research opportunities are, what any other opportunities are that you might be interested in. So that's kind of how I kind of narrowed it down to deciding that UConn was a good fit for me.
The last question that I have for you is, what activities did you undertake in your last couple of years of undergrad, or in your case of your master's degree, or either, that helped you in your application to grad school, or have that were in preparation to apply to graduate schools, or if there's something that you didn't do that you think you should have done, maybe you share that.
I would say letters of, maybe not activities, but letters of recommendation are huge. So I feel like establishing a relationship with a faculty member early on is really important. Since I was an advisor and I worked here, I had students ask me all the time to write recommendation letters, and there's a varying level. It's really easy. I used to work on in admissions too, so it's really easy to tell if a letter, if they know them kind of casually or if they really know them and support them. So I think to have a really strong recommendation letter, you need to have a relationship with that faculty member. So to visit office hours and to try to take multiple classes with one faculty member in your field that you want to go into is important to get a better recommendation letter. Faculty don't mind that kind of like visiting office hours and that networking, that reaching out and kind of keeping in touch with them, even if you're not in their class that semester. I'd say that's really important.
Yeah, similarly, as far as like in my undergrad, I tried to get involved as much as I could in ways that would benefit my application, and not just saying like, oh, I'm involved in something, but I, since I was applying for higher education programs, I knew that the work that I wanted to do to support that application process and, my ability to do the work in grad school was like becoming a peer advisor, doing an internship in the career services department at my undergrad institution. I signed on to do research with one of the faculty members as like an undergrad researcher. So just finding those opportunities and building those relationships. And this is kind of a conversation I have with a lot of the students that I teach now who are freshmen or sophomores, is establishing good relationships with your professors early on, even if they're classes and professors that you don't think you'll see again. It's unfortunate for students when they don't necessarily come across in the best light to faculty, and then they find out like 3 years later that faculty member is involved in something else that they want to be involved in, and that faculty member now doesn't have like a good opinion of that student because of how they performed in one class 3 years ago. So it's kind of like learning not to burn some of those bridges because like one class that you took your freshman or sophomore year was kind of not great. So establishing those relationships with faculty kind of early on and knowing that they do serve a purpose for you other than like giving you a grade is helpful.
Yeah, I ended up taking a class, and the professor was my academic advisor here. And I hadn't really met with her much except for like, what classes do I take? Like, I need to switch out. Like, what's happening? But when I had her as a professor, I was like really transparent with her about me as a student, but like me also as like a human. There's a point to this. When you're in your classes and like something doesn't go right, like you submit a paper late or you don't perform well on an exam and that's not like you, my greatest piece of advice is to be transparent. So like go to those office hours or meet with your professor or send them an email and ask to follow up and say hi, like I apologize, like I understand that I submitted this thing late, or I'm disappointed in my performance on this. And then you can give them context and meet with them and kind of meet with them one-on-one, because in my experience, being honest with your professor about like why something happened and doing it that way helps set you up so that if you need support down the line, or if they're part of something that they can like help leverage you a little bit, not speaking English right now, but if they can help you out in the future, you'll want to have like made those like uncomfortable steps early on instead of trying to backtrack later. So meeting with academic advisors and just like being engaged in classes and things like that go a long way, and you won't realize it until like after the fact. I was also, so it depends on the degree. There aren't like social work internships, because in order to do social work, you have to have a master's, because in order to get a license, you have to have a master's. So that's why I went into the program. So you can't really practice. So I was like, how am I supposed to get an internship? Everyone's getting internships around me. The thing that I would recommend is don't look for the word internship, look for the experience. So I had an experience where I was working with real life social workers. I was working with children in foster care. I was working in that environment, but it was like a summer job. That gave me so much more to talk about in my applications and different interviews, not even for grad school, but that gave me so much more than the experiences I had that were called internships. So keep an open mind when you're looking to gain experience, because those things that might not seem like the best experience might give you the best experience.
I think for me, I did a lot of research when I was in undergrad, but also like UConn is a giant school and has a lot of opportunities, and taking advantage of those is a great way to like show that you're really serious about what you're doing. So like if your major has a poster fair, or if you can like give a presentation, or there's like a national conference for undergraduate research, those kinds of things like show a buy-in from you that like this isn't just like something that was really fun that I did in a class, but like I really wanted to share that, and like I want that professional experience. You also like get to travel for some of that stuff, which is cool. So I went to the National Conference for Undergraduate Research 3 times when I was an undergrad. My school paid for it. One time was in Hawaii. What more could you ask for? But also don't discount the things that you like already do. I was really stressed out when I was starting my applications, and I was like, how am I going to like structure all of this? How will I keep this all straight? And then I realized that I ran a sorority for a year. I was the president of a sorority, and if I can keep 100 people straight, I can keep 13 applications straight. So like noticing the skills that you have, carrying them over, and talking about those skills in your applications is a great way to like transfer what you know that you can do to an admissions committee that they might not see. So don't discount what you are already doing. It's not like you have to like all of a sudden cure cancer to get into grad school, right? Just like take stock of the skills that you do have and think about how those skills apply to what will make you a great grad student.
And if you're having a hard time articulating that, go to the Center for Career Development.
Plug.
I worked there and I work there now. But I think the reason why my application experience was less stressful than it could have been was because I had those resources at my fingertips. And it felt like that because I worked there. But like I only made like two appointments at the Center for Career Development. Yeah, I worked there, but just meeting with like one of the career counselors for 30 minutes drastically changed how I was approaching my applications. I didn't know about graduate school trackers working there until I had that meeting with them. So it's free. Utilize it.
Thank you. Really great advice. So at this point, I just want to open it up. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask the panel? Yeah.
When deciding on taking a gap year, would you say try and like apply for schools and go through the process to see like whether or not you'll even get in versus just not deciding to do it at all and just taking that year?
That really depends on what you're interested in and maybe your personality. I feel like it costs a lot of money and time. If you're not sure, it might be better just take the gap year and use that year to do the application rather than going through the effort twice. And I think I really recommend a gap year. It's not always fun when you're in it, but looking back on it, I'm very glad I did it. I felt like it affirmed what I want to do. It gave me the time to fill out the applications and study for any tests that you may need to take. I already had taken the GRE, but and then I think it also gives you a little bit of time to beef up your application if you want. Like, even though I mentioned I worked retail because that was the job I had, I did volunteer at an after-school program. Then I also ended up getting a second job at another school, so I was able to add those, since I was applying for education, to my resume that, I was using that gap year. I think it also is just nice to have a year off from homework and school stuff that, so I don't know if I have a best answer for you of like which one would work for you, but it's enough time and energy that maybe if you're debating it, it's best just to wait a year.
Sorry. Really quickly, I was considering a gap year, so I started all of my applications and I set myself up to hit different deadlines, and then throughout that process is when I started solidifying if I wanted to actually go right away. So if you're even considering it, start looking at schools, start creating your materials. Through that process, you might be able to think about it. But I think a gap year could be really beneficial. I didn't end up doing it because financially I had to go straight through, but
Right, that's a good point too, because I already had the experience and had the research done on the school I wanted to apply to, so that did make it easier, since I did that while I was still a senior.
On the flip side, I did not take a gap year. I would not have done well with a gap year. I know that about myself. I knew what I wanted to do and I went straight through. But if that is the case, someone mentioned it earlier, burnout is real. So like if at all possible, give yourself a break over the summer. Even if that looks like a week of like shutting yourself in your room and just watching Netflix, take something to try to reset, because going straight through is difficult. My program is 7 years. I have never not been in school since I was 3 years old. So like this is the only thing that I have ever done, and taking even some time to like very clearly mentally reset before grad school will help you once you get here to like actually deal with and process the change in school, the change in workload, all of that stuff.
And that is really true as far as a grad student. You're there as a professional and you're working. It's not the same as being a student in undergrad. And so I think it is really important to go in with a different mindset that these are your colleagues and peers in the future, the faculty that you're working with. So it's a very different mentality than undergrad. Of attending classes, you're pretty much a professional the entire time.
Even just teaching, like I entered my first UConn classroom as a professor at 21. I also had a majority of students who were 21. And so if I didn't take the time to kind of flip that mindset, that can be a really like nerve-wracking experience. So just like having thought about the fact that like you are here as a professional and that you like all of a sudden now have to deal with undergrads and like thinking about how you'll do that in a different way than how you acted as an undergrad, I think is a really important part of that transition.
Yeah, I would also say, I mean, I didn't take a gap year initially, like going from my bachelor to my master's, and I think if you're deciding to go because you don't know what else to do or you feel like you have to, that's probably not the right reason to go. I kind of was in that boat where I was like, I don't know what else to do with my degree besides continue on, which may be the case for a lot of degrees, but I think if that is the case, it's good to have a clear picture of like what your passions are, what your goals are, and talking through that with folks that are your mentors or folks at, you know, the Career Development Center, so that you can make sure that you're on the right path, because, you know, I went through a master's program that I'm essentially not doing anything with, and it cost me a lot of money. Obviously, it was a stepping stone for me getting into a PhD program, but, you know, there are other ways I could have gotten here too that would have cost me less money. So if I had known that in retrospect, and if I had put in a little bit more time and effort into being thoughtful about where I was applying and why, versus just being kind of really gung-ho about applying to like all these cool states and like getting out of, you know, New York State, which is where I lived, you know, so just being thoughtful about it and kind of knowing what your intentions are for doing it.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, yes, please.
What did you do to stay not overwhelmed with the process? Or if that was just impossible? And you're
I'm in
so
the thick of
overwhelmed?
it right now, I will tell you.
Are you applying to schools? Good.
Oh, not overwhelmed applying?
Or in
Or-
grad
Or
school.
in grad
Grad
school.
school.
Because I'm like, it's midterms right now.
Oh.
Be very deliberate with self-care and time for yourself. Unless you plan it, this is personally, unless I plan it or I'm thinking about it or it's in my schedule, I will not do it, and if I don't do it, I will burn out. So, and I think that's kind of everything. That's undergrad too, that's applications, that's grad school. You have to have those pockets of time where you say, okay, I'm gonna go take a walk in the morning on Saturday morning, and I'm gonna do that, and I'm not gonna start my work until 11. And you have to schedule those pockets in, because you'll keep going because there's always something to do.
I think recognizing that applications, grad school, all of it is a marathon and not a sprint. It sounds super cliche, but like if you don't do the research on Monday and you put it off to Wednesday, nothing's gonna change. It's not like you're not gonna get into that school because you scheduled it in for a Monday and you did it on Wednesday. So recognizing that like productivity 100% of the time will actually make you less productive, and I agree, like being really deliberate with scheduling in time to do whatever makes you happy is a really important part of both the application process and surviving the real marathon of grad school.
I think not being comparative either. I think I cried a lot senior year. Senior year is hard when everyone is getting into grad schools or finding jobs, and it's so much worrying about the future to remember to really enjoy the present and do that self-care of that, you know, you all end up with a job somewhere and doing something that you enjoy. Like, I am a true believer in everything works out, and so, you know, that even if your friend got the best job in the world, you know, it'll work out. You might just have a little bit of a break or do something else for a while. It all leads to the same place. So trying not to be super comparing yourself to all your peers that are doing things senior year that make it stressful. So have a good cry. It'll be better.
We don't have any more questions. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time and sharing their perspective. And thank you for participating. If you'd like to come up and have an individual question answered, please feel free to do that before you leave.